Ambassador Deepak Vora, you known as one of the foremost experts of Sudan and South Sudan, if I may say so. What do you read into the military statement post today's developments?
It's very interesting that one of the last strongmen of Africa has had to go in circumstances that seem to parallel those in other countries. He came to power on the back of discontent, popular discontent, rising prices, collapsing currency, increasing difference in income levels between the rich and the poor.
Exactly one of the
And that's
reasons
the three major reasons he has gone today on the 11th of April 2019. As we say in French, la plus ça change, la plus c'est le même. The more it changes, the more it is the same. When I was ambassador there for 5 years, the longest serving Indian ambassador in Sudan, I love the country. The president himself, Omar Hassan al-Bashir, is a fine person. I interacted with him frequently. Kind-hearted, very generous. But there was also a side to him that would brook no opposition. Now, during his 30 years, he presided over some momentous events. The first was the Islamization of Sudan under a fellow called Hassan al-Turabi. Second was the booming oil revenues of the 1990s when oil prices were very high. Sudan also came to be associated with terrorism by hosting fellows like Osama bin Laden. And then the biggest thing was the separation of South Sudan in July 2011, also under his watch. And then Darfur erupted. So someone to survive all this for a long time is in itself pretty remarkable. He was able to do this through a very strong national intelligence and security service. They consumed almost half of the state budget. And so he was able to crush dissent. But this doesn't last for very long. The Sudanese people are tolerant, but enough is enough.
The point that you were raising, so 30 years, some would say those who live by the sword will die with the sword.
The Sudanese are very proud. They do not accept the indictment of President Omar Hassan al-Bashir, however much they may dislike him, by the International Criminal Court. So they would never surrender him to the International Criminal Court. What will probably happen is my assessment, that he will be exiled to an Islamic country, possibly Saudi Arabia, and he will spend the remaining part of his life there in relative peace and comfort. Remember that he is suffering from throat cancer. He's approaching 80. I'm not sure that he has very long to live.
When you look at what's happened now, the protest started sometime in December, so it's about 4 months. But how do you see the protests playing a part in his removal or the coup in the larger prism of, say, the Arab Spring?
It's a delayed arrival of the Arab Spring in Sudan. When it happened first, I recall the Arab Spring, which started in Tunisia. At that point of time, the Sudanese government actually controlled the prices of bread, etc., and didn't want the virus, if I may call it that, to infect them. However, as American sanctions became more effective, UN sanctions kicked in, other countries participated in the sanctions, the price of bread doubled, tripled, quadrupled. The price of other staples such as fulful, which they have, that increased, beans, which the Sudanese eat. Then the income disparity between the rich and the poor kept rising. They were very unhappy with that. And as a result of the sanctions, the currency, which was 2 Sudanese pounds to the dollar when I left Sudan, is today 300. So people couldn't afford it. Their salaries hadn't increased. Darfur continues to fester. The indictment is there. It was just a feeling, bhai bahut ho gaya aur nahi kind of thing, you know.
So in terms of the Darfur indictment by the ICC, your presumption, because you still have contacts at the highest level there, would be that the military announcement that we expected early in the morning and has taken quite a few hours to come.
It was being negotiated. They wanted to make sure that they said something that everybody would accept. They have announced a transitional military council for 2 years, which will consist of civilian technocrats as well as the military officers. It will be chaired by General Awad Ibn Abu. And they've arrested some people, including the president. The arrest basically means, in my understanding, preventive detention, to prevent him from being some would say, lynched by the people of Sudan because the anger was very high. Some people had died. Now, the interesting thing is that in some ways, this is a coup within a coup. The military overthrowing a field marshal. Also, there was a standoff between the army and the very powerful National Intelligence and Security Service, which is directly answerable to the president and is headed by an amazing person called Salah Ghosh. He was head of the NISS for a long time, then he was removed and he was put in jail, then he came back. And I recall when I was still in Sudan, at some public function, he kind of held up his right hand and said, anybody who opposes Bashir, I will cut off his right hand, kind of thing. You know, this sort of statement, melodramatic, didn't go down well with those of us who were watching. But now what is happening is with the army opening its headquarters and allowing civilian protesters to come in, that was very unusual, thereby showing that the military is on the side of the people. Every time the revolution that has taken place in Sudan has been, or anywhere in the world, is always in the name of the people. But this time the army showed that they were protecting the citizens of Sudan from the National Intelligence and Security Service. Arrests have been made. I don't know what has happened to Salah Ghosh. He's probably been arrested.
So would the temporary restrictions on airspace have anything to do with
No, no. That would be to prevent people from flying away. Some of them have private aircraft and they don't want them to go. They've closed their land borders also, mainly to South Sudan, to Ethiopia, on the other side to Chad. You know, the politics of that area is very volatile. Now we hope that some kind of stability will come because the Sudanese people are tired. Very fine people, very tolerant, very generous. I used to visit Sudanese. I'll give you a little example during Ramadan when we break our fast with iftar. I would be driving somewhere and people would be sitting on the road to break fast. They'd see the Indian ambassador. I speak Arabic. They'd look at me and say, Zafir al-Hindi, and I'd say, yes. And then say, please, sir, get off and break fast. And I'd say, listen, I've just broken at the previous stop. And then he'd kind of look at me and say, get off and eat. Say, all right. Another 15 minutes later, stop somewhere. But that's their generosity, their hospitality.
But you're saying they're tired. Will they be satisfied with what has been announced?
They wanted change. 30 years they've had this person. Prior to that, they've had others who've been around for a very long time. So what they want is that we need change. Sometimes just removing the head itself gives you reason to hope.
And there's this icon, this lady who stood up on a vehicle and chanted, the revolution is here, uprising is here. She's been seen as a symbol.
She's a symbol of the youth. Yeah. She's a symbol of the womanhood of Sudan who've been suppressed. It's an Islamic country, right? Women's rights are not what they should be. But then she stood up and she was accepted by everybody. Middle-aged housewives came out on the streets. Schoolgirls came out on the streets. Grandmothers were on the streets saying, enough, enough, enough. We now want change. And that change has come. So I'm hopeful, in fact, I'm confident that the new government that comes will go through these 24 months and then make way for a civilian government with a new constitution. Do you know that the first elections that were held in Sudan in 1956 were supervised by Dr. Sukumar Sen, who was India's chief election commissioner? President Bashir told me many times that some of his best officers had been trained by us. In fact, in 1955, April, at the Bandung conference, when the non-aligned movement was formed, the then interim Prime Minister of Sudan was Ismail al-Azhari. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru called him to Delhi, flew him in his own aircraft to Bandung. And at Bandung, they said, well, where's the flag of Sudan? It isn't yet independent. So Panditji on his white handkerchief wrote Sudan and said, this is the flag of Sudan. They remember that. There's a lot of affection for India, wholehearted, warm feelings about India. And they know that they should tell us openly, we'd like to follow the Indian example, the Indian model. We're a role model for them.
Vis-a-vis the West, now, will anything change dramatically?
I don't think so. For Sudan, they don't like the West, period, because they've suffered, they've seen, they tried intelligence cooperation with the Americans over Somalia, they handed over people, they did a lot of things, but they didn't see the benefits coming to them. They were hoping that the sanctions would be removed, they were not. So they don't really trust the West very much.
And India doesn't have that baggage.
We don't carry any historical baggage. If we have anything, it's the glow of friendship. We've given over $1 billion in soft credit to Sudan. We've done a fair amount for South Sudan. I remember inaugurating a solar village there that was a gift from us. Many Sudanese come to India, probably over 100,000 have studied in India in the last 50 years. They come to India for medical treatment. We are very liberal. We are a very good people. The Sudanese are a very good people, and good people tend to trust each other.
And since we're not part of the ICC, the whole Darfur question doesn't come into play.
It doesn't come into play at all. We have, of course, privately and officially also told them that sort it out as quickly as you can. It doesn't do your international reputation any good. So they said, yes, we understand. We are fighting for the integrity and unity of our country, and we in India understand what that means. We're also fighting at times for the integrity, territorial integrity and unity of our country.
Yes, South Sudan also takes India as an example.
Oh, absolutely.
Both in democracy and the diversity.
Absolutely.
And how to incorporate it.
No question about it.
Does anything change, especially because oil is so important to both countries, and they had kind of reached an understanding $30 a barrel, I think, was in royalty to the Sudanese?
The South Sudanese say that we took 80% of the oil production. Now, with oil prices being very volatile, and with oil, I believe now almost becoming history as a commodity, both South Sudan and the Republic of Sudan have very little else to depend on. So with $30 or $40 a barrel, and Sudan asking for royalty for allowing a barrel of oil to be carried through the pipelines, all of them go through the north. It's not a viable proposition. So they'll have to find other solutions. Sudan claimed to have some gold, but even that has not really fulfilled the promise. Now, I'll tell you something also very interesting. Once upon a time, when a new pipeline was being built, I had asked the president of South Sudan. At that point, the president of the interim government of Southern Sudan, who was the first vice president of all of Sudan, the present president, Salva Kiir Mayardit. I'd asked him that, sir, why is the pipeline going through Sudan? And he said, well, it'll go to Port Sudan, we'll evacuate our oil. And I said, why is it going through the north? And he said, because of evacuating, carrying the oil. I said, sir, why is it going through the north? And I don't think he understood why I was asking him that. At the back of my mind, the idea was that why shouldn't it go to Mombasa, for example? But anyway, what has to happen has to happen. There are moments in history that we take decisions, or we don't take them, and then we face the consequences. But if there are people, my friends in Sudan, who are watching this, I just want to tell you, and if I may say so in Arabic, Allah Barafik, Allah Salimek, may Allah always look after you. You're a wonderful people. I left your country has never left me. I left my heart behind in Sudan.
Wonderful words. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.